Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg. I'm your host for Yoga Birth Babies, and today we have a return guest, Dr. Rachel Reed. She is a senior lecturer and discipline leader in midwifery at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia, and she's practiced midwifery in a range of models and settings in the UK and Australia, and she is a writer and presenter and is the author of the Midwife Thinking blog. She came on about a year ago to talk about inductions. She has a book out on that as well, and as I was just perusing through her blog earlier, I saw she has a new article about the perineum, protecting your perineum. And I have yet to meet a pregnant person or someone birthing that hasn't wanted to protect their perineum. So she's talking about that. She gives amazing insights as to ways and tools to protect your perineum, to think about the positions you birth in, how that will affect your perineum. So I think you're going to enjoy that. Also, total fun side note, check out our show notes on this because Rachel happens to have a beautiful blue peacock named Eddie that lives in her yard. And I got a glimpse of him during our taping and I was just enamored. So I asked for a picture. And so he is being shown. We'll call him the sponsor for this podcast. Also, I've had people ask me where they can continue to find online classes with us. So we have about 10, 15, 20-minute small segments of different yoga classes. But I've now put together a bit of a package. It's 4 one-hour videos with all different focal points. One's a chest opening, one's a squat, one's just a really fun vinyasa. And you can get that little package deal of the 4 videos on our website at prenatalyogacenter.com. Also, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that we've had a big announcement recently. We are moving our studio to a new space. It will be a bigger practice room, a welcoming lobby that we're going to have a little tea set so people can sit and chat and connect. We're also going to have a treatment room with a chiropractor and a massage therapist and acupuncturist. So offering under one roof so many opportunities and treatments and support for the pregnant person and the new parent. So to help support that big move, we have an iFund Women crowdfunding fundraiser. And you can check that out at ifundwomen.com/projects/changing-lives-1-birth-time. That's our tagline, changing lives one birth at a time. You can also, if that's just too long to hear and try to remember, head to our website, prenatalyogacenter.com, and you'll see how you can contribute. Now, offering donations not within everyone's means, so you can also support the podcast and the studio by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to this. It just helps people find us, and hopefully what we offer is enriching people's pregnancy and birth and parenthood. All right, I think that's enough of me chatting. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, enjoy the conversation.
This podcast is sponsored by Skylight Calendar. Let's be real. Running a household can be exhausting and chaotic. And finding the perfect Mother's Day gift, it's not exactly a no-brainer. Until now. The Skylight Calendar is the best way to organize the family and give everyone, especially mom, some peace of mind to enjoy the things that matter most. The Skylight Calendar is a smart, touchscreen calendar that keeps track of and manages the chores, dinner planning, groceries, and to-dos for the whole family. The Skylight Calendar automatically syncs each family member's digital calendars and displays them all together on one color-coded touchscreen. It even doubles as a digital picture frame, so you can finally share all those special moments that are just sitting on your phone. As a limited-time offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Calendar when you go to skylightcal.com/easy. That's SKYLIGHTCAL.com/easy. Get 15% off your Mother's Day purchase now at skylightcal.com/easy.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So it's our second podcast together, and I'm thrilled. I will say I don't love doing evening podcasts, but with you in Australia and me here on the East Coast, I know this is our matching time. So yay, I'm thrilled. And okay, community, I got to tell you. So Rachel got up to grab her headphones, and outside her window is a beautiful blue peacock. So when I told her that, her response was, "Oh, that's Eddie." So if you're listening, just picture a blue peacock watching this whole interview. It just made me laugh. And there he is. I want to see if we can get a screenshot of that somehow. All right, so we're talking about a little bit more of a serious topic besides peacocks, protecting your perineum. I think it's an important topic. So I guess before we dive into that, just tell me a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, well, I'm a midwife. I have an experience of practicing midwifery across a range of models in the UK and Australia. I'm currently a senior lecturer and discipline lead of midwifery at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, which means teaching into the midwifery program, Bachelor of Midwifery, and doing research, which is primarily focused on birth, women's experience of birth, midwifery practice during birth. I do a lot of writing and presenting and have the blog Midwife Thinking.
Yeah, I found the funny thing is I had been reading that for years before I connected. I listened to you on a different, I don't remember where it was. It might have been with, I think, the Better Birth Summit. And I'm like, I think this woman's amazing. And then I put it together that I had been reading your podcast for years. I was at your podcast, your blog for years. So yeah, you're such a great writer. You're such a good presenter. So I guess let's jump right into the whole importance of protecting your perineum, which I guess let's start with, for some people, especially if they're newer to being pregnant in the birth world, they may not even know what the perineum is and where it is and what it is. Let's go really basic.
Okay, so it's basically the area between the symphysis pubis at the front of the pelvis. So, you know, that bone right at the front of your pelvis, and the coccyx at the back. So it's kind of that whole bowl kind of shaped area. And it includes the genitals and the anus. And I guess in particular for birth, everybody focuses on that kind of bit that's between the vagina and the anus. Those are that particular area is where all the attention is focused, which it shouldn't be, because there's a lot of other things going on in the perineum. But that's in summary what the perineum is, but it's pretty complex.
And there's a lot of concern that during birth it will get damaged.
So most women will have some kind of what we call damage to the perineum. A baby's going to come out and that area is going to stretch. And damage ranges from grazes, small tears just in the skin, to what we call, so those would be first degree tears, if you kind of look at the medical classification. And then second degree tears involve a bit of muscle, so the vaginal wall and into the muscle. And that's what most women get, is that range of tears. And rarely, well, sort of 3 to 4% of all births, but that includes births with instruments, and 1% of vaginal births without instruments will have what we call a third or fourth degree tear. So that's where the tear starts to, in a third degree tear, kind of interrupt the anal sphincter. So it may just, go slightly into there. And a fourth degree tear is all the way through the anal sphincter. So it's very scary and not something that people kind of look forward to, so there's a lot of concern over that, understandably. So those are the types of tears.
And we'll cover some, if people are listening to this, especially if they haven't really studied birth or thought about it, the one thing I'll make sure that we talk about is, because that can sound overwhelming, saying third degree, fourth degree, ways what we can do prenatally and during birth to lessen the possibility of those third and fourth degree tears. I will say I think my final number was a little over 100 births. I hadn't seen that many big tears. I saw one really big tear where the mother pushed out her baby quickly out of spite for how the whole scenario unfolded. It was a very fast, angry birth, and then I've seen like 2 episiotomies. But for the most part, I was happy to say that many intact perineums. From your experience as a midwife, how much, if you could percentagize it, I'm making up words now, how many third, fourth degree tears have you witnessed? approximately?
So out of hospital, none. In hospital, it depends, because with instrumental births, that's when the risk's pretty high, which is when somebody's actually pulling the baby out. With not including that, probably maybe 5 that have just been spontaneous vaginal births with no instruments where that's happened. So it's pretty, and that's in hundreds and hundreds of births. So it's not a common occurrence in spontaneous normal vaginal birth.
Well, that's something I want to get at for those listening, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen to my perineum?" Just putting in perspective that the chances are low. So let's also talk a little.
It's 1% across all spontaneous vaginal births, and that 1% includes women who are having interventions that will increase the chance of that happening. So it's even less if you're not having those interventions.
Yeah, which we'll get to as well. So let's talk also about episiotomies, and it's interesting. I'll give you a little background of what's something's been in my head recently on Facebook. Of course, so much happens on Facebook. There was a conversation in this one group about, there was a woman who was 40 weeks pregnant, and she was concerned. She just found out that her care provider regularly does episiotomies. And this is, these days. and there was a conversation with, literally over 100 comments of what should she do. And my thought, unfortunately, is like, this should have been discussed way before. But can we talk a little bit about what an episiotomy is and when it should be advised as opposed to routine?
Okay, so it should never be routine. If we look at research evidence and evidence-based clinical guidelines, then really the only reason that it should be done is for fetal distress. So that's if the baby's becoming very distressed and the birth needs to happen very quickly and the baby's quite close, but it's not close enough, which is really rare. And for if you're wanting to use forceps or a ventouse and you need more room to get in and put it on. So that's when it's most commonly done, is when a doctor's doing an instrumental birth. That's it. Those are the clinical guidelines. However, practice is not necessarily evidence-based, and I know that it's becoming increasingly popular in Australia. So our rates of episiotomy, anecdotally, and I cannot get these numbers, and I know they're there, is going up. So I have student midwives who have seen lots of episiotomies. I've only done 3 in my whole career, and I think 2 of them were unnecessary. That's, how unusual it is in midwifery practice. But they're starting to do them. So our Queensland health guidelines, our local guidelines, are now saying for soft tissue dystocia is another reason for doing it. Now, what is that? That just means that the baby's coming out slower than the prescribed timeframes that are not evidence-based. So really it's lack of patience. And I know that some practitioners will do them to prevent tearing. So if they think a tear is going to happen, they'll cut, which is kind of interesting because cutting damages the perineum more than tearing generally. But so those are the reasons that it would be done. But if we're looking at the evidence, then it shouldn't be done for anything other than fetal distress and instrumental birth.
And I'm glad you brought up the whole idea of the easier repair for a tear, because as I read through all those comments on this particular Facebook page, that's what the doctor claimed. It's easier for him he felt it was more controlled with an episiotomy, and he could have a cleaner repair. So let's talk a little bit about the fallacy of that, because it seems like when you really cut through the muscle, there'll be a higher chance of there being a straight through to the anal sphincter, because you're going through several layers as opposed to the surface small soft tissue. You're really going to muscle right then. So can you address that?
Yep. So one of the biggest risk factors for a 3rd or 4th degree tear is a midline episiotomy, which is the one that you're talking about, which is where the cut goes from the vagina straight down towards the anus. There's quite a good chance that will extend and then, go. So that's one of the biggest risk factors. So in terms of episiotomy, that's not a recommended way of doing an episiotomy in order to control it, because it does the opposite. It kind of puts everything out of control and sends the tear exactly where you don't want it. So a mediolateral episiotomy, which is the common one in the UK and Australia, is, so if you imagine kind of you're going straight up and down, but then you turn kind of 60 degrees to the side. So it's almost kind of off to the side. That's the recommended way of doing an episiotomy because it's less likely to extend. However, that type of episiotomy cuts through nerves and clitoral tissue because, your clitoris, as we've only just discovered, because nobody was looking, actually wraps around the vagina and has these roots that kind of really kind of fold around the vagina. So you're risking cutting into those. And we know that women who have that type of episiotomy are more likely to have sexual dysfunction 5 years down the track. So we know we're doing something. So you kind of either cut down and you increase the chance of a 3rd or 4th degree tear, or you cut across and damage tissues that you don't want to be damaged. And in terms of controlling, it's this idea again of controlling women's bodies, that we can do that externally better than the woman's body can. So when a tear happens, it tends to track along kind of the path of resistance. So it kind of doesn't go through major tissue usually. And in terms of repair, so we absolutely know that tears heal better and hurt less for women. Having said that, the doctor is correct. Suturing an episiotomy is much neater. I used to suturing episiotomy, which I've had the opportunity to do when there's been an instrumental birth and the obstetrician's kind of left me to do. I'm used to suturing tears. Is really neat because everything kind of fits together and you can see where it goes. So it's, as a care provider, it's easier. It's not easier for the woman.
Who's then healing for the rest of her life. Like she lives with that vagina for the rest of her life.
Right. So for your few minutes of this is a lot easier, it's kind of not really a good payoff for the woman long term.
Right. Oh, well, thank you for explaining that.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+. Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
So now that I've hopefully not scared everybody out of their mind about this, let's turn the corner into, all right, so we want to avoid the 3rd and 4th, likely going to get some sort of skid mark or, 1st or 2nd. So what can we do prenatally to start to help have a nice, happy perineum and healthy perineum?
Okay, so your body gets pregnant, it grows a baby, and it is perfectly capable of preparing for birth and birthing a baby. So, and the body does, you'll have increased vaginal discharge to soften all of the tissue. Any woman who has been pregnant will know that, everything gets a bit soft and mushy down there. It's all getting ready for the birth. And in terms of supporting that, good nutrition is key because, all of your tissues are influenced by nutrition. Promoting a healthy microbiome in the vagina, movement, so particularly yoga, and that's just because of that body awareness connection. But really, the body there isn't anything you need to do prenatally. The body prepares for birth just like it is growing your baby without you having to think about it.
Right. I've had a lot of students talk to me about perineum massage, and I actually wrote a blog about it, and I didn't find a ton of research. I think there's something in the Cochrane Review, but if I remember correctly, it was like women over 35 have like an 8% higher chance of not tearing by doing that. It was a really small increase of possible positive effect. I personally did not choose to do it because I looked at it, I studied it, and I'm like, this does not look comfortable. So can you give me your thought on perineum massage? Because it's not a massage. It's not like a happy back massage.
No. It should be called stretching, perineal stretching, because that's really what you're doing, and it's not comfortable. My take on it is, look, it's up to the woman. I think we've got to be careful with recommending it because by saying, oh, you need to do this, or perhaps you should do this. It's really, again, reinforcing the idea that there's a need to prepare for birth, and that contradicts, the fact that women's bodies are actually capable of birthing without any preparation. So having said that, some women gain confidence from feeling that stretch. I've certainly looked after women, particularly women who have had VBAC, who already have that kind of concern about, can I do this, all of that stuff going on, that when they do perineal stretching massage, I looked after one woman who was just like, oh my God, my body's amazing. It's so stretching so much more now as I'm getting closer to birth than it was at the beginning. So that really helped reinforce to her that her body could do this. So I think that's a perfectly good reason for doing perineal massage. In terms of the research around perineal massage, there isn't really any good research to show that it reduces tearing. It does reduce the chance of an episiotomy, which is interesting because an episiotomy is not a tear. So it reduces the chance that your care provider will cut you.
Why?
Well, and this is a problem with research. It tells us what, but not why. I would guess that may be because you will stretch a bit quicker during the birth because you've already been stretching.
Right.
So you will hit the time frames that have been set that are not evidence-based, but you will hit those time frames more readily than a woman who hasn't.
Got it. As you were saying it, I started to put a few thoughts together that it can build confidence. If someone is anxious about their upcoming birth, they could be really engaged through their pelvic bone. They could be tightening it from the anxiety in their body. And so then that can release because they feel confident that, oh, I'm doing good things. So it could be almost like a placebo effect. Does that make any sense where I'm saying, like, because they're anxious, they're tightening, and then they're like, oh, but I'm doing good things, my body relaxes. So I could see the value in that. But I do wonder about constantly stretching. Could it create overstretch of the pelvic floor muscles?
Well, we don't know because nobody's done any long-term research. And the Epino, that will be interesting if anybody. It's unlikely that there'll be research because it's a product, and they're certainly not going to pay for research that shows their product's not any good. But have you heard of the Epino?
Yeah, I don't think they have it in the U.S. I think a lot of people get it from Israel.
Ah, good. Don't get it in the US. So it's basically a balloon that you put into your vagina and blow up until you're and then push it out. So by the time you birth your baby, you've probably given birth to numerous times the size of the baby's head, which to me, I would be very interested to know what happens to your pelvic floor.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because as someone that works with a lot of pelvic floors, that's something I've worked a lot on. And I had some pelvic floor issues after my first because I pushed for literally 5 hours. So his head was crowning forever. My pelvic floor and I had a little tough relationship at the beginning of that. We weren't quite seeing eye to eye. It took a lot of work. So I'm just wondering how that would affect the pelvic floor muscles. And I would be hesitant to recommend that. I can understand for some people feeling again the confidence that, okay, I have opened, I know I can open that far, but having birthed an 8-pound baby and had pushed out for so long, it really negatively affected my pelvic floor. So I can't get behind that. But again, I have no research on that. But thank you for sharing those options. So let's start to shift a little bit to the actual labor and birth, and again, helping protect the perineum. What are your thoughts on things that can happen during the actual labor itself and then the birth that could factor into a healthier, happier pelvic floor?
Okay, well, we know that during the birth, the evidence-based factors that increase or alter the chance of tearing or where you birth your baby, so increase, not surprisingly, hospital birth, position of the baby, so a larger part of the baby's head coming through the pelvis, which is actually more likely to happen if you've had an epidural and your pelvic floor is relaxed and the baby isn't, encouraged into a nice tucked in small head part of the head presenting position. A midline episiotomy, which we've talked about. Instrumental birth, particularly forceps, because forceps need quite a lot of room. Prolonged, what they call second stage. I don't use stages of labor because they're made up. So a prolonged pushing stage. And that's probably because it results in an instrumental birth. So it's probably not the length of the of that is probably because the interventions that happen when a woman goes beyond certain time frames, as you know, you went way beyond.
Well, I was at home, so had I been in a hospital, I'm sure I would not have had that luxury of time, and I either would have had some sort of instrumental or a cesarean. That's my guess. Who knows? Yeah.
So that and pitocin. So pitocin, particularly for women who've already had a vaginal birth previously, can increase the chance of tearing because it makes the baby come through quicker than it would physiologically. So you've got a quicker birth. And also, chances are, I'm guessing, with syntocin, more because more women have epidurals with that, you've also got that baby coming through with a bigger head presenting.
Yeah, the chin's not nicely tucked in. So can you talk a little also about literally the positioning of pushing, how that can affect the perineum?
Yeah, so if you think about the principles of optimal outcomes for perineums are slow birth, so nice, slow, gentle stretching of the perineal tissues, so giving them that chance to really get lubricated and stretch, and give in the perineal tissues. So what I mean by that is the capacity to stretch. So when you're kind of thinking about what improves outcomes, if you kind of think of those two principles and what helps support those principles, then it kind of everything else fits into place. So in terms of positions, any position that allows the perineum to have give, so with the legs not really widely stretched open, which makes the perineum really taut. I actually tell student midwives to go home and do this as homework, to try different positions and feel how much give and capacity is in the back of their vagina in different positions, in that in the perineum. So any positions that really stretch out the perineum with the legs wide will increase the chance of tearing. Any positions where the legs are a bit closer together, so the key ones that are really good for the perineum are hands and knees position, kind of kneeling but with your hands on the floor, and lying on your side. And the additional assisting point with those two positions is that the baby's not going directly all of the force down into the back of the perineum. It's kind of more pushed towards the front or the side. So those two are really good for preventing tearing. Anything where the woman has her legs wide open and where the baby is kind of all the pressure's going backwards down towards the perineum. So any
like
position where the woman's on a,
like that classic
semi-supine is the worst. Yeah. Reclining, sitting slightly upright, that's the worst position for perineal tearing.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's what the most common position is. And then people are often taking the legs and yanking them back. So then we're stretching the perineum even further. All right, so that's
which is a great recipe for a tear.
Yeah. All right, so listeners, especially if you have an epidural and you're like, well, maybe I can't get on all fours, you can always get on your side, because that's not going to, you don't have to worry about supporting your legs. Because I've been having attendance in births. A lot of care providers say, like, you have an epidural, you can't, I don't want you on your hands and knees because you can't necessarily feel your legs. Some will turn it down. So while you're saying that's a great position, especially if they kind of lean forward over the bed, they're using some gravity there, but side lying, that's a great idea. So it creates a little bit more not relaxation, but less taut. Is that correct in the pelvic floor? Because it's almost a little baggy, I guess, or not as stretched.
And that's the word I use, baggy, and my students laugh at me, but that's it's not a technical word. But it is. You want some bagginess in the back of the
that's what I was like visualize. I think if anyone's watching this, like with my hands, I'm like, okay, here's the perineum, and it's baggy. Okay, I'm glad you and I are on that same wavelength. I like that. Yes.
And if you're lying on the side, just be careful, because sometimes you see women lying on the side and then somebody's holding their leg wide open, which is really not necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're on your side, I mean, I've seen a baby come out of a woman who actually had her legs crossed, doing her best to try and stop the baby coming out, and the baby still came out. So when you have your legs closed, you're not actually reducing the capacity for the baby to come out, because your pelvis holds your legs away from that space anyway. So if a woman's on her side, then I know they've got those peanut balls.
Mm-hmm.
That the woman can drape her leg over something, or some pillows or something, so that her legs are actually not really wide apart but relaxed, so that the baby can kind of come out of the pelvis without
We
going
talk
through a very
about
tight
that
perineum.
in class when you're actually in internal rotation. So if you have that peanut ball in your knee, the upper knee is lower than the ankle, you're actually widening the space between the sit bones. And it's funny because people think spread your legs far apart, I'm going to create space. Well, not only are we stretching out the perineum as we talked about, we're actually taking your sit bones and your legs are externally rotated. The sit bones are closer together. So you're actually creating a smaller outlet of the pelvis. So you're decreasing the space for the baby to come out. But I can visualize being on your side. So if your legs are parallel, there's more space for your sit bones. But if that top leg's internally rotated, you're lifting that sit bone and creating even more space for the baby internally. And then the pelvic floor is more relaxed. So that seems pretty ideal. You're creating almost like a bigger hallway for the baby to come out. If that makes sense. If you can visualize where I'm going with all this.
A baggy hallway.
A baggy hallway for the baby. A spacious, baggy hallway. That's what we want. We want a spacious, that's what I'll tell my students tomorrow in class. We're going to try to create a spacious, baggy hallway in your pelvis. We'll see how that goes over. All right, so how does then, so I'm kind of jumping ahead. I want to get back more to some of the perineum stuff, but how does a student even, or a client even talk to their care provider about this? If they may not be on the same wavelength, if they're not used to birthing someone in a position other than their back?
It's really difficult because care providers have their own little rituals, I guess, and ways of practicing. And if they conflict with what is wanted, then it can be difficult to negotiate. I always advocate having a birth plan, so you have it in writing, and that it's mentioned antenatally and discussed antenatally, particularly if you're wanting to go away from what that care provider is comfortable doing, that you've actually said, I want to do this, that I'll take responsibility for doing this. This is what I need from you, and have that kind of all sorted out before labor and birth. Because you can't really have those discussions in labor and birth. And to keep, to kind of craft those requests in a particular way, I guess. In my book, I've got about induction. I've got a whole chapter on writing a birth plan for induction. And I guess it translates across. So things that are, for example, with pushing, saying I would like to follow my own bodily urges when I push my baby out. I would like my care providers to give me non-directive, reassuring support as I do this. Or, you could say that I prefer that everyone remain silent while I do this. So you've already said, you're going to be quiet while I'm doing this. That then takes out the directed pushing. And with the perineum, say, as my baby is being born, I would like to be supported to birth instinctively without directions and without my perineum being touched.
Well, let's talk about that. Because as I was reading some of your material, that was interesting. So I have witnessed a ton in what I thought was the norm. And I feel like now, after reading your material, it's not. I always saw the hand supporting the perineum as the head was emerging. And the way it was explained to me is that it's less likely to tear when there's a hand supporting. And I've also seen warm compresses applied with the idea that the warm compress, the moisture and the warmth is going to help soften the muscle tissue. Can you comment on that?
There's lots of fiddling that goes on while women are giving birth. That's actually why I did my PhD, was being at birth and seeing all of this stuff happening to women, particularly as they're pushing their baby out, and thinking, why are we, surely we don't need to be doing all of this stuff, and then looking for the evidence and realizing the evidence actually wasn't there to support it, and in fact often contradicted what we were doing. In terms of hands-on, that is the norm, which is amazing to me. I was taught hands-on for the same reasons. You're protecting the perineum, so you then have this belief that, again, this woman's body's dangerous. You're preventing the danger by the things that you're doing to her, instead of the other way around, which is actually the things you're doing are often creating the danger for her. So that seems to be the common way of doing things, which is interesting because the evidence, if you look at the research we have about hands on the perineum during birth or not, is that hands on doesn't reduce the chance of tearing. It increases the chance, in fact, it increases the chance of tearing for women who are having their second or subsequent vaginal birth, and it increases the chance of episiotomy. And nobody gains consent. I've never heard anybody say, can I please put my hands on your perineum and baby? This may increase your chance of tearing, but I like to do it because I've been trained to do that.
Right. No, I've never heard it been asked. So again, I feel like I'm getting this great information and I want to present it to my students. And I feel like there's going to be some headbutting again, that the students then go in excited about this new information they're learning. They're like, yeah, my body, I trust my body. I'm going to let my body open. And then they try to have a conversation. Again, I never want to put the care providers like they're bad or evil, because I don't think that's the case, but it's what they've learned. So then how do we empower and encourage the student or the pregnant person to want to take this step, but yet the care provider, that's just not their wheelhouse. They may not have learned that it's better to be hands off. So again, we have a gap. How do we bridge that gap?
We do. I guess, so if we look at the care provider's intentions are good. They genuinely believe that by doing that, they're preventing tearing.
Yes.
Okay. Despite the evidence, evidence takes 10 years to get into practice. And often doesn't get into practice if it isn't aligned culturally with what people want to do. So you've got care providers who are doing what they've been trained to do, that they believe is best. And then you've got women coming into birth saying, well, I want these things. And ultimately, to do anything to somebody, you need to have consent. So it kind of works from the care provider to the woman. The care provider needs to get consent to do things to the woman. What I find helps is if women take responsibility for their decisions. So often with care providers, if you can meet them saying, okay, these are the things that I like. I understand that that's not something you're necessarily comfortable with, and I will take responsibility for the outcomes relating to these decisions that I'm making. And that lifts that weight of responsibility from the care providers, because often what they're worried about is if something happens, I'll get the blame. And if you can kind of take that from them, and I actually, in writing birth plans, I also suggest having it right up front in the birth plan. Let me find it. A little phrase that kind of really reinforces that relationship. Here you go. So something like this right up front. I understand that it is the role of the health professionals to share relevant evidence-based information with me to assist in my decision-making and to gain consent for procedures. I also understand that my decisions and any outcomes relating from my decisions are my own responsibility.
That's big. That's really great. So I wonder.
So that's kind of just laying the foundations.
I wonder, and I'm actually going to approach this with some of my students, if there's then maybe a lack of confidence to take that ownership. Do you run into that?
Well, we're conditioned, aren't we, particularly women, that we're not the experts and that these people know more about our bodies and babies than us, and that we trust them more than we trust ourselves, and that you certainly don't want to be you want to be a good girl. And certainly in some of the research that I've done, women have said, I went along with this decision because I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to upset my care provider. I didn't want to be that bad girl, which we're socially conditioned to not be, not ask questions, not be assertive, because assertive is aggressive. So it's really the relationship that women have with the maternity services and with care providers really reflects women's position socially and culturally and history and a whole other podcast of things.
Now, can I get a copy of that sentence I can add to the show notes? Can I ask you to type that to me later? Because I want to put that out there. Yes. It's powerful. It's really powerful to say, I'm taking responsibility for my body. And I feel like we need to encourage that more.
We do. And really, unfortunately, antenatal care, before antenatal care, coming into being a mother, what we want from mothers is strong, confident mothers who trust their abilities to know what they and their babies need. This is what we're wanting. And yet what we're doing is culturally indoctrinating and grooming women to rely on external experts and to not take responsibility, to hand responsibility over. And then we're surprised that they hand responsibility over and don't know what to do when they've got a new baby. And we've created those conditions in our society. So for women to reclaim their bodies and their births, they also need to reclaim the responsibility.
Yes. Wow, that's big. I was not expecting us to go in this direction, but that's really big. And I like that because, again, if someone does have trauma to their perineum, it really can affect their whole quality of life and how they see themselves as a person and how they then function. And that can be a lifelong problem, especially if, it has cut into the nerves of the clitoris. That could affect relationships. So, if we look at the broader picture of if we take ownership, how that can actually improve quality of life. I might be taking this too far, but that's where I feel like let's start at the base of our body. I'm going to kind of
absolutely.
I'm going to pull us a little bit back on topic. All right, so we talked about different positions. Let's talk a little bit about, and you mentioned it a little bit, directed pushing and the effect on the perineum, but then also I don't know the percentages. I think it's definitely in the high 80s, maybe 90s, of births happening in the hospital settings are epidural. And with an epidural, you don't have that instinctual urge to push. So if we know that directed pushing is not a friend of the perineum, how does someone with an epidural push without direction and to protect the perineum? So just come back to really be mindful of your position.
Yeah, so if we kind of, it's easy. Instinctive physiological birth is easy because women just get on and do it.
Yeah, they feel like, oh my God, I got to push.
Yeah, and they go, oh, I need to close my legs, and oh, I need to slow down my pushing because the baby's head's crowning, and oh, I need to try and stop the baby from coming out so fast because it's hurting. So that all happens. Once you have an intervention like an epidural, because you've now done an intervention, you need to carry on with interventions. And the kind of best approach is trying to track those interventions to meet more closely what would be happening physiologically. So I guess looking at the principle, so a woman who's got an epidural, you look at the principles again, which is a slow birth. So that comes down to positioning and, allowing this baby to really descend through the pelvis slowly without directed pushing, which, just compromises the baby and, increases chance of tearing. And in what position is this woman in? As you were saying, there's no reason that a woman with an epidural has to be semi-supine with her legs wide open. That just doesn't have to happen. So it's positioning the woman, helping her change positions a lot, especially with an epidural, as that baby's coming through the pelvis, because the woman isn't able to respond and move physiologically and instinctively to what's happening in her body. Now you need to do that as a care provider. So you need to be helping her to, okay, let's try lying on the other side for a bit. Let's try this position for a bit. Let's try your leg, and all of that, helping her move the baby down. So the evidence around pushing with an epidural is that you get the best outcomes if you wait until you can see the baby's head in the vagina. So you just allow the uterus to push the baby down until you can see the baby's head, and then you don't even need to encourage pushing then, particularly for a woman who's had babies before. The baby will come out. I can testify to that. I went to make a tray of tea and toast once and came back in the room, and there was a baby under the covers who had just birthed while I was making the tea. So they do come out without anybody pushing. The mom said, oh, I think there's something's happened. So they do come out. If it's the woman's first baby, then, if she wants to, she can be encouraged to just push gently and not big chin on your chest, push, like, chickens going off. Just that real kind of nudging the baby. And if the baby's head's already there, it shouldn't take long. It should only be a little bit of pushing, which means a little bit of, extra stress on the baby, and to really be mindful of slowing it down. So with an epidural, the care provider might need to say, okay, stop pushing now and just let your uterus push the baby the rest of the way out, because the woman's not getting that feedback from a perineum. So you kind of need to be the feedback from a perineum. So it changes things a bit, but there's no reason why you can't work with an epidural and promote a healthy perineal outcome.
That's good. So let that ring of fire just kind of sit and let the muscles stretch. What about what I often see instructed, like, okay, take, because they're pushing and then it's stretching and they're letting it stretch. And they'll say, like, okay, just give me a few little pants or a few little pushes. What are your thoughts? Or not even do that and just really let the uterus just keep pushing baby out?
Well, I guess it depends on what's happening at that time. And you certainly wouldn't tell a woman who didn't have an epidural to pant or stop pushing, because she'll do that instinctively if you keep out of the way. That's a natural behavior. Is once anyone who's felt that kind of ring of fire, you certainly don't want to go bring it on and push into it. You kind of go, and close your legs and try and not push. So that will happen. A woman with an epidural isn't getting that feedback. So you do need to kind of just watch what's happening. And if the baby is coming too quickly, then yes, you might need to say, look, maybe stop pushing, or just breathe, or just teeny little nudge pushes. So there might need to be more direction with an epidural.
Okay, good. So I know a lot of the people listening are probably going to go that direction, so I want them to feel like they still can have a healthy perineum even with an epidural. Before I move to your latest article, is there anything about preparing we were talking about preparing the perineum, just life does that, just being pregnant, and then anything about anything else during the actual labor and birth to protect the perineum that we haven't covered?
Oh, warm compresses, which you did mention.
Oh, yes. What are your thoughts on those?
So warm compresses can reduce the chance of a significant tear. And I'd certainly say with an epidural, when people are already your perineum, it's fairly easy to put a warm compress on. I find in my practice, when you've got a woman instinct, the positions they get into, and they often shut themselves in rooms and things, you can't get to the perineum. So that's not really if the woman wants me to do that, I'll do that, but it's not something that I run around trying to follow the woman with a warm compress, because I might actually disrupt whatever she needs to do instinctively by doing that. So they can reduce the chance of a very significant tear. They don't reduce the chance of kind of second degree tears. Some women really like it, if we get this really, that's such a relief having that lovely warm compress there. Other women just get off me, don't touch me. So I guess it really depends on the woman and what she's needing at that time. So, and the water birth works in the same way.
Right.
It warms the tissues, and it's even better because nobody can get in and fiddle with your perineum when you're in water.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I kind of likened my idea when I've seen the warm compress. I'm like, well, they can't get in the water, and the warmth from the water can help soften the muscle tissue. That was just my logic behind it. So I'm glad to hear that, it's not going to necessarily hinder unless someone's being pushy about it. Like, let me get to that perineum. But glad to hear about that. All right. So as I was scouring your website, which I do often, and I'm not remembering, I couldn't figure out how you pronounce it, but you have a latest article about the Oasis bundle, if I'm pronouncing that at all correctly. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and the intent of it, and how these practices are aimed to support the decrease of third and fourth degree tears? And do these new practices work?
Oh, okay. This is my a bit of a bugbear, and it keeps coming up with students and midwives. And whenever I go to conferences and talk about anything, we end up talking about the bundle because it's such a big issue for midwives at the moment. So and it's called different things in different countries. So I know that the UK's got one, Australia's got one. I don't know, the US has probably got one. So what it is bundles are where they go, okay, this thing's happening, whatever it is. So let's create a little bundle of interventions that will reduce the rates of this thing happening. So for example, in Australia, there's a whole group of hospitals have got together and they're benchmarking, and they identify where they need to make a difference. And what they saw was increasing rates of third and fourth degree tears. So their response to that was to then create this bundle of interventions that they've rolled out into the key hospitals to try and reduce those rates down, which is perfectly, it makes sense. However, as with everything in the maternity services, it really what is implemented is underpinned by belief system that underpins the maternity system, which is, that women's bodies are dangerous and that medical intervention can reduce the danger. So, which again reflects history. So the answers they come up with reflect that. So for example, if you're going, okay, we've got high rates of third and fourth degree tears in this hospital, it would be an evidence-based approach to say, okay, let's reduce the things that increase those tearing. So let's reduce instrumental births. Let's make sure women are not on their backs and on in positions that increase tearing. Let's, offer warm compresses or water births. That's not in the bundle, because whoever made up the bundle was mostly obstetricians and gynecologists had the most power, even though it's supposed to be a working party. So what they ended up coming up with was directed pushing and hands-on the perineum.
But they're encouraging that?
Yes, this is what the bundle's made up of. So if you opt in to have the bundle as a woman, and you're supposed to give consent and have, information to get consent, is that you will have directed pushing, as in slowing down pushing and, telling women how they need to push their babies out. You'll have hands-on, so there'll be all of that, putting your hands on the perineum, that it actually can increase the chance of tearing. It says mediolateral episiotomy. So that's a one off to the side when indicated. And again, that's, what is an indication? It's not very clear about what an indication is, but with all women who are having an instrumental birth, they should have an episiotomy, which is frustrating because a lot of obstetricians can do ventouse with an intact perineum. So they're kind of pushing obstetricians also into doing things that, is not necessarily in the best interest of the woman at that time. The other thing they're saying is rectal examination for all women. So even if you have an intact perineum after birth, that you would be subjected to a rectal examination just in case there's a tear that nobody's noticed, that just happens to have gone like a little hole in the back of your vagina, which I've never seen. I've never seen one, but you get the anecdote. So there was a woman that, that one incident, then everything. And then the other one, which I agree with, is proper grading of tears. So, make a proper assessment and have a review by an experienced clinician if there is a tear. That was happening anyway, so that's fine. So that has been rolled out into all of these hospitals. Midwives are not happy because they're being told to do these things that they kind of know aren't really evidence-based. Obstetricians aren't happy. The compliance rate is about 17%, which is great, because clinicians are just going, we're not doing this. But, some pockets, everyone's just doing it, and other hospitals, nobody's doing it. So it's kind of all over the place. So that's where we're at with the bundle. And I just find it incredibly frustrating that they can just roll out an intervention without ethics that's not evidence-based and tell all these clinicians to do these things that are not evidence-based and they don't want to do.
Without the ones like you, who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And then when you challenge it, it's, but third and fourth degree tears are so terrible and have such an impact on women's lives. And they'll show all these movies of, women talking about how traumatized they are. And it's yes, but that's right. But the answer is not more intervention.
Right. And my concern is if this is something the woman has to consent to, which is good that you have to consent to it, she may not have the background to know that directed pushing can be problematic, no hands-on. She may hear this, it's recommended. They're going to direct me. They're going to support my perineum. Yeah, that sounds great. So if she hasn't had the opportunity to learn the pros and cons of these things, she may actually sign up unknowingly for more intervention that could be more harmful. Does that sound about right?
No, and that's right. And I heard a presentation of, and they can't really call it research because they didn't have ethics, because it's just a clinical governance exercise. It's kind of anyhow. I heard a presentation of their findings and of their qualitative findings, where they'd interviewed midwives, obstetricians, and women, and what they then concluded from those interviews is that everybody loves the bundle. So they had quotes from women saying, yes, they were, of course, that if you say to a woman, when you're giving birth, I can do these things and it'll reduce your chance of tearing. Of course, a woman's going to say, yes, thank you. That's great. I'll sign up. But if you say to her, if you give her the information you actually need to get legal consent, which is, okay, these are the risks and the benefits. These are the other options. What would you like to do? You might get a very different answer. And similarly with midwives who have argued we've had this debate going on since I was a student midwife, hands on, hands off, what should you do when the baby's coming out? That if you can then say to midwives, okay, here's some clear direction about what to do when the baby's coming out, then midwives go, thank you, now I know exactly what I need to do. It's kind of not a grey area anymore. So they're not asking the right questions to then say, this is a good idea. And the results of whether or not women tear is very interesting, because there is no good evidence that this bundle is making any difference. And what I can't get out of the Australian bunch who have implemented this is the rate of episiotomy, because anecdotally, the episiotomy rates are going through the roof with this bundle, because the episiotomy, when indicated, has been seen as it's best to do that rather than get a tear. So what I think you're going to see is you may or may not see a reduction in third or fourth degree tears, but you'll see a massive increase in episiotomy rates. But they're not releasing those rates.
Well, then that's going to then turn into a massive increase in pelvic floor dysfunction.
Yes. But they're not counting episiotomy as perineal trauma when it is. It's actually more than a second degree, well, it's at least a second degree tear, but, more than, because it's harder to heal and it's more damage to the tissue.
So like the long-term effect on the pelvic floor is going to increase that whole population.
Yeah. So really we need to be, as consumers and midwives, asking for those episiotomy rates to be published.
I feel like they're going a little backwards in things.
Well, we are. I often say it's Marty McFly midwifery at the moment.
Yeah, this is not
going
good.
Back to the Future.
Wow. All right. So you've given us a lot to think about. So as we start to wrap up, is there anything else you want to talk about, whether it's about the bundle or anything else about the perineum in general that we haven't covered that you think is important for the community to hear?
Oh, I think we've covered.
I know, we went deep.
Pretty much everything.
All right. So I know I really like talking about this. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to ask for one tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents. It could be about the perineum or not. You're a very established midwife and with a lot of experience. So pick from your treasure trove of advice and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So let's hear it. One piece of advice or tip you'd like to offer new or expectant parents.
Okay, so I would say that to know that you are the expert on your body, baby, and your needs during birth, and that you have everything within you. Trust yourself, and just be a little bit wary of all those external experts, because they're generalists. You know more about you than they do.
I love that. Yes. Okay. And where can people find your work?
Midwifethinking.com is my blog post. Yes, that's mostly where you can find me. There's a Facebook Midwife Thinking page as well.
And you have a new book.
Oh, yes. But I've got a book out on induction, so why induction matters. And that's really aimed at people trying to make a decision around induction, but also if they are having induction, then how to kind of really take more control of that and make it an empowering and good experience.
Yeah, and with the number of people that do have inductions, which is high, that's a very important piece of literature they should read. So thank you for telling us about that. I had such a great time chatting with you. I really enjoy your work. I think it's important. I think we need to get it out to as many people as possible because you're well researched and you approach things in such a smart, concise way. So thank you so much for your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you for interviewing me. It's been fun.
That's all right. Well, enjoy your day. And also, get me a picture of Eddie. I want to put him in the show notes.
I will send you a picture of Eddie and I'll send you those quotes as well.
That's all right. Well, enjoy your day.
And you.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.